When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite characters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, Maegor the Cruel. He's one of the most complex, interesting to speculate on. We're going to be looking at his reign overall. So I want to preference this is not a character analysis to the point of like where I go super in depth with every action that he did even as a child that don't really relate to his reign at all. This is more to follow in the format of the Aenys video where I look at a lot of his actions as a ruler and what maybe motivated some of the things he did. And by the end, kind of figure out how good or bad of a ruler he is. Now, Maegor is much more difficult than Aenys because Maegor, how you rank him as a Targaryen king really depends on what lens you're looking through. Are you looking through how good was he for the Targaryen dynasty? And if you're a Targaryen, how would you look at him? Or are you looking at it from the common person, right? If you're an average person dropped into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, how would you view Maegor the Cruel? So we're going to kind of come to that decision by the end of the video. So starting out, we'll talk a little bit about his childhood. In 11 AC, Visenya Targaryen, Maegor's mother, announced her pregnancy. This was really important for the Targaryen dynasty, just given the fact that Aegon only had one heir at this point with Aenys, and Aenys was a sickly child, and so Visenya having a child also gave a lot more legitimacy to the Targaryen dynasty. There is a little bit of speculation and rumor about his birth and if it was done with, witchcraft or something along those lines, as Visenya is linked to that quite a lot. I don't want to really talk about it all that much because it's not all that relevant to Maegor's reign, but just know that that was a rumor at the time. So Maegor was born then on 12 AC. He was large, strong, and an infant, and almost twice Aenys' size. He is the polar opposite to Aenys, and what's so great is we start out the Book of Fire and Blood with Aegon, who's like one of your better rulers. He's great at using, his strength and his fear to make people bend the knee, but he's also good at being a ruler. But then you have his two descendants, which are kind of like two polar opposites, where you have Aenys, who is much like his mother Rhaenys, but to more of an extreme, a people pleaser, doesn't want to do violence, any of that kind of stuff. Maegor leans into Visenya, where he's much more of a mama's boy. He's very violent and angry. He's not a good ruler, but he's also willing to do violence and step up and really lean into the fear factor that Aegon would use at times. Now, Maegor growing up was, once again, not close to his half-brother in Aenys. He was raised by his mother. We don't know much about Aegon parenting him as a whole. There's not much to indicate that Aegon was very present in Maegor's life compared to Aenys, as Aenys was the heir to the Iron Throne at the time. And also Visenya and Aegon during this point were very separated, especially after the death of Rhaenys. At 3 years old, Maegor would receive his first sword, and he is rumored to have even killed a cat, just showing those violent tendencies. Now, we don't know necessarily if this did happen. This could have been like a maester just lie or history written by the victors to paint even Maegor worse, but we don't know. At age 8, there seemed to be a continued pattern of killing animals as he kills a palfrey that kicked him, and he had slashed the stable boy's face. So there is a pattern of kind of what we see with, like, for instance, people that turn into serial killers or just killers in general, with cruelty and killing animals present within Maegor, if this is all true and to be believed, which I do have my doubts, but again, not a character analysis, just kind of looking at ideas that maybe would turn him into Maegor the Cruel. We do know that from his early point, Visenya was somebody that very much put her parenting style into Maegor. She taught him really that violence was a good thing, and she rewarded him with violence. We're going to see that in his early years before he, really becomes a prominent figure in Westeros. Every time that Maegor does some great deed with violence or combat, winning a tournament or whatever, he was rewarded. And Maegor was also praised by his mother by being, better than everyone else, that they are House Targaryen, they are above the average person, they can do what they please because of their dragons. And so a lot of what you're going to see with Maegor's actions during his reign are influenced by Visenya quite a lot. But some notable things in his youth: he was trained by Sir Gawain Corbray, Master at Arms of Dragonstone. At age 8, he became a squire. At age 12, he unhorses older boys and defeats men-at-arms in the yard. At age 13, during the year 25 AC, he defeats hardened knights in melees, and he was gifted a dark sister in the same year on his 13th name day. So you see right away, Maegor's early life was spent in violence and becoming a great warrior and fighter. He doesn't take a dragon, and he even very similar to Aemon. And I don't know if House of the Dragon meant to do this, but they paralleled Aemon not claiming a dragon very much with Maegor, where Maegor seemed to have been made fun of by Queen Alyssa. Well, at this time she would have been Princess Alyssa, the wife of Aenys Targaryen, of not claiming a dragon. And Maegor, from an early point, seemed to know that there was only one dragon for him, his father's. Now, he wouldn't claim it for a number of years until Aegon would die, but that seemed to be what he was waiting for, and it was probably prompted by Visenya as well. So just remember, the main things that Maegor is known for and what he gets rewarded for is violence and becoming a greater warrior by his mother. Other things happening during the years 22 AC and 25 AC that I talked a lot about with Aenys' reign, you would just see general things of succession issues in the division of the claims. You would have Aenys marrying Alyssa Velaryon in 22 AC. He has a daughter, Rhaena, who is then born in 23 AC. At this point, Visenya tries to unite their claims, saying that they should betroth Maegor to Rhaena, and this does make a decent amount of sense, albeit there would have been quite a gap. There would have been about, I think, 11 years between the two, but it would have done a good job of taking Visenya's side and Rhaenys' side and uniting those claims. But this was rejected by both Aenys and the Faith. And so Maegor is prompted to marry a Hightower and Cersei. Now, this is a huge point to me of like the Hightower and Maester conspiracy and the High Septon, everything at Old Town conspiracy, because it's interesting that, oh, you deny Maegor's marriage, but then you marry him to a Hightower. Now, this marriage would not necessarily go well at all, as Maegor would struggle to have children, and this would be another thing that would motivate his reign later on. Again, in his, I would say his formidable years, his years around, like, say, Robb in the main story, between, 14, 15, 16, in that range, he would start to really start gaining a name for himself. He would win a tourney in 28 AC, defeating 3 Kingsguard in joust and melee. He was knighted by Aegon I at age 16, the youngest knight in Westeros. And from 29 to 30 AC, he would fight pirates in the Stepstones. And in 31 AC, he would defeat the Giant of the Trident. So he starts gaining a name for himself. It's very similar to people like Daemon, for instance. And Maegor, at this early point, would start to really become known as the real heir of Aegon, because Aenys doesn't really look as much like Aegon. He's much more smaller, whereas Maegor is bigger and he's more, I would say, just muscly. He gives off that reputation of fearing the Targaryens to a degree, and Maegor plays into that really well with being a great fighter. And we really see that happen when Aegon I dies. You start to see how the public starts to like and maybe respect Maegor much more than they do Aenys, because Maegor is somebody that doesn't have the issue of needing to be a ruler, and we don't even know if he was really trained to be a politician, anything like that. I highly doubt it, given the way his reign goes, and especially the way Visenya parented him. But he is somebody that, if you're just hearing about him, he would have been like this fabled knight. He would have been this fabled warrior, and especially once he gets Balerion. Everything really changes in this point between 37 AC and 40 AC. So 37 AC, Aegon I would die, Aenys would become the king, and Aenys does another horrible action. We talked about this in his reign, but Aenys would admit he was no warrior and gift Maegor with Blackfire. So now Maegor controlled both of the ancestral swords of House Targaryen, giving him legitimacy. We know later on Blackfire would be the main sign of legitimacy once the dragons are gone, and so giving that to Maegor with Dark Sister, it helps to prove that anyone already that were like, hey, maybe Maegor should be the king, I like him more, he's a better warrior, fighter, it just backs that up. And so for a lot of reasons, Aenys and Maegor is kind of like a mini foreshadowing to the first Blackfire Rebellion, albeit it's very different just given that Maegor is a Targaryen, whereas Daemon Blackfire was a bastard. But at this point, we would see as Aenys' incompetence would spread throughout his entire reign. I would really check out that video before this one if you want to get more information, as I detail much more in that video about Aenys' reign. But Aenys would make a number of blunders in action and not doing anything. And so Maegor at this point would make a name for himself even more so than he already had. He would claim his father's dragon Balerion, crushing Jonas Aaron's rebellion, hanging his followers, and then being named Hand of the King for his valor. Not only would Maegor become this person that's fabled in terms of his ability to fight with the sword and joust and all this other stuff, he now has the most powerful dragon, the dragon that Aegon the Conqueror had that bended the kingdoms to his will. He has both of the swords of the Targaryens. He has the support of Visenya. A lot of the public sway would start to turn towards Maegor being a great option for king. Well, maybe not at this point, but people would start to follow him, kind of similar to, say, Daemon the Rogue Prince. As Hand of the King, Maegor and Aenys would rule together quite well, and so that would give more legitimacy for Maegor, as he now had that experience of being Hand of the King, and things were going at least decently well as when he was Hand of the King, so it would just give more legitimacy to Maegor. But this is when everything would kind of start to explode. So in 39 AC, Maegor had kind of declared that Cersei was barren, and he marries a second wife, Alis Harroway, and Valyrian ceremony. This outraged the faith and the lords, and one thing I will say about Aegon, he didn't prepare his sons or even the realm that well for the issue that the faith represented, and this kind of had a major issue for Aenys. Aenys was forced to do something about the Maegor issue. He ordered Maegor to choose to set aside Alis or exile for 5 years. Maegor chose exile, leaving for Pentos with Alis and Balerion. And in Maegor's absence, it really gave the faith full reign to continue going against Aenys and making his reign a living hell, because Maegor was not there. The muscle was not there. The same way that Daemon kind of looks to be as like the muscle for Viserys, the person that more people fear during Viserys' reign. The same is also true here with Maegor as he goes into exile, very similar to what we also see with, say, someone like Daemon. In the years 41 to 42 AC, the Faith Militant rebellion would erupt. Aenys would die on Dragonstone, his heirs also being more or less besieged. I wouldn't say besieged, but trapped more or less at Craighall. So right now, the heirs to the Iron Throne are trapped. They have no way of escaping. Aenys has died. The Targaryen dynasty is on the edge of collapse. The faith has completely uprooted them, and Maegor is in Pentos. And so Visenya, who some people believe killed Aenys, would then instantly go to Maegor and bring him back. And this is a very controversial moment, especially for people that look at Maegor. And the question really is, should Maegor have made himself king? Should he have not just helped Aegon, the son of his brother Aenys, and helped him climb the throne? But you also got to think about it from this point of view. Maegor has watched as his brother has completely destroyed the dynasty. It's on the verge of collapse. Visenya is obviously pushing him to take the throne, and obviously is believed, even since when Aenys was made kind of the heir and was being groomed to rule, that Maegor was the one that should have ruled in the first place. And so Maegor isn't really even looking at the idea of helping Aegon, because Aegon's an extension of Aenys. Who is to not say the same thing wouldn't happen? Maegor helps Aegon, Aegon destroys the realm continuously, and all of that. So this comes as a moment where Maegor takes the throne. And honestly, I don't blame him. I think this was the only course of action that would have efficiently restored the Targaryen dynasty. So he would be crowned at Dragonstone with the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, as he beheads Grand Maester Gawain, who had gone against Maegor in this. But again, all the signs of legitimacy have turned to Maegor. And this is the other part of it. It's like, the public are not outraged that Maegor is taking the throne over Aegon. Now, a lot of people would have been backing the faith, especially the common people. The Targaryens did not have a lot of love at this point. But if you're looking at from the higher lords, they probably would have been more likely to back Maegor than Aenys' son at this point, just given the situation. And so Maegor, in a lot of ways, had a lot of reasons to take the throne, and it made sense to do so. But Maegor's reign would start with a very chaotic start. He would challenge the warrior sons' captain, Daemon Morrigan, to trial by 7. Maegor's 6 companions versus 7 warrior sons. Maegor took a brutal injury and alone survives, but falls into a coma for 30 days, only to be awoken by Tyanna of the Tower's care. And she is a figure we'll talk about loosely, just because this is about Maegor's reign, but we won't focus a ton on her. But she is somebody that was alleged to also be dabbling in magic. She was the torturer for Maegor, and he also will take her to wife as well. Getting into 42 AC to 44 AC, this would begin the first half of Maegor's reign. And for me, it would be the most important part of his reign in terms of, I think a lot of what Maegor does in the early sections of his reign is justified in terms of keeping the Targaryen dynasty alive. It's really when you start to get after this initial conflict with the Faith and he ends up beating them that things kind of go south. So upon awakening, he would burn the Scepter of Remembrance on Balerion, winning battles at Stonebridge and the Blackwater, and then he would have his third marriage where he would once again behead another Grand Maester. He marries Tyanna of the Tower, and that would be his third wife. Maegor would also then build the Red Keep, and for one thing, King's Landing wasn't really a established castle, a defensible position at this point, and it still wouldn't really be all that much during Maegor's reign. It would really start to be a symbol of the Targaryen dynasty and power in Jaehaerys' reign, but Maegor is the person that starts that process as he builds Maegor's Holdfast and also builds the torture dungeons. He enacts laws against the armed clergy and rebellious lords. This would start the war on the Faith as Visenya would burn Reacher lords, Maegor burning Westerlands, and then also threatening Old Town. The High Septon would die, and a new High Septon was anointed instead. This High Septon was anointed specifically so that he would more or less bend his knee to Maegor and actually crown him more or less. And at this, the Faith Militant would be outlawed, there would be bounties placed on the warrior's son and poor fellows, and reconciles briefly with Cersei Hightower. These are all great moves in terms of he actually now gets officially anointed by the Faith, and so his legitimacy is at an all-time high. He's dealt with the rebellion of the Faith, he's stripped them of their weapons, something I think a lot of high lords and small lords would have liked because it now gives them more power over the Faith, and the Faith, it would recover from this, but it would never be at the heights of its power really until Cersei undoes this act, and this would be probably Maegor's biggest moment of his reign, the most successful thing he does, because without this, the Targaryen dynasty would have struggled a lot more. So once we get to the point where Jaehaerys becomes king, there's not much of a fight left in the Faith. Like, yes, they have influence over the public, but they've been completely stripped of their weapons for the most part. There is a small contingent that is still fighting against the Targaryen dynasty, but at this point, Maegor has laid the path for what Jaehaerys' reign will be later on. But at this, Prince Aegon the Uncrowned, the heir to Aenys, would rise against Maegor. Now, you can understand why he would do this. Aegon is the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne, but here's the big issue. Aegon was still untested in war, his dragon Quicksilver was much younger and much smaller than Balerion, his battle was doomed. Even his wife Rhaena did not actually help him, well, his sister wife I should say, did not help him. Now, I think this is more to the effect that she wanted to protect her children, and also, I don't know, because if I'm Rhaena, I'm looking at this going, we cannot beat Maegor. But Aegon the Uncrowned tried. He did have a sizable army supported by the River Lords and the Wester Lords, but Maegor would slay Aegon and his dragon Quicksilver in single combat on Balerion, and this would officially earn him the title of Maegor the Cruel. Kinslaying is a horrible crime that is seen in Westeros, but in my opinion, what was Maegor supposed to do at this point? Like, yes, you can say Maegor shouldn't have taken the throne, even though I think he should have, and I understand why he did. But the idea is, Aegon now is challenging your power. He's not bending the knee to you. You've now been given all the signs of legitimacy. You have the swords of the Targaryen. You've been crowned by even the Faith at this point. He's saved the Targaryen dynasty. Why should at this point he now bend the knee to Aegon the Uncrowned, who has no power really whatsoever? So I personally don't think this is a horrible act. I think maybe some things should have been solved, like maybe some more discussions, but that's just not who Maegor the Cruel was. And so after this point is really where I think Maegor begins to unravel. This is where the start of his fall begins. He was not a good ruler because at this point the war was pretty much over. The war on the Faith had been pretty much destroyed. Any claimants to the throne now had no real backing or really any power at this moment. Maegor also still had the support of his mother with Vhagar. They had the largest two dragons. Nobody could really go against them. Maegor's reign was, for the most part, pretty secure. The only thing that could outdo it was, well, Maegor making many mistakes. And like I talked about, Maegor, a great ruler during wartime and being able to fix all those problems, but during relative peace and trying to create a peace, he's not very good at all. At this, though, we would see Queen Alice bear a monstrous child for Maegor, and he executes all involved, as they're allegedly she was sleeping with other men. It's kind of more of an excuse for Maegor to not say that, oh, he was the person that helped birth this child, and it's very clear Maegor had reproductive issues, but there's also some manipulation going on here with Tyanna of the Tower as well. It's just this whole culmination of Maegor starts to become very paranoid, not accepting the facts that he is probably having the reproductive issues, not the women he's blaming. It's causing fear, and it's turning people that will slowly start to begin to see all his cruelties and begin to go, why do we want this guy to be king? And so a lot of these cruelties that go over what he should have been doing is what turns a lot of people against him. And before we get to the aftermath of this, Maegor would also then massacre House Haraway and destroy their lands. Somebody that had been quite faithful to him and his rule was now wiped out in an instance. Now, the next part of this that would be the biggest domino in his fall would obviously be the death of Visenya. Visenya was somebody that was quite wise, albeit I don't think she went about things the best in terms of raising Maegor. She was able to temper him and also allow him to make better decisions, and so I think a lot of the reasons Maegor's reign goes so well in the first, opening years is largely due to Visenya. But at this point, Maegor seemed to be devastated. He was a mama's boy. It seemed like he really grew up with one parent, not two, in terms of Aegon. But it would also have even a bigger repercussion, as the Dowager Queen Alyssa Velaryon, the wife of Aenys, had escaped to Dragonstone with Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Now, Princess Viserys, who at this point Maegor had considered to be his heir, was captured and tortured to death by Tyanna. This was another huge mistake. I mean, Viserys could have been used as, in a lot of ways, somebody to rival Jaehaerys' claim. It also helped the stability of Maegor's reign, and it also just was like unnecessary violence on an innocent that just didn't need to happen, and it was just really stupid. Maegor, I think this is another huge domino in his fall. But we would see another positive for Maegor, followed by a huge negative, as the Red Keep would be completed in the year 45 AC. Now, to keep all of its secrets, he would hold a grand feast for the builders and then executed all of them. Now, this is another interesting topic, because we know that the secrets are going to get out, at least to some degree, for people like Mysaria and Varys in the future. But I do wonder, what was Maegor supposed to do? If you're having all these people build these passages, how do you keep that secret? You're having passages go to all throughout the castle. How do you keep that secret? Yeah, you can try to pay them off, but that doesn't guarantee their silence, for instance. So I think it's a very cruel action, but I can see the rationale as to why he did it. But this was not the end of Maegor trying to get things constructed, as he would construct the Dragon Pit on Rhaenys' Hill using prison labor. At this, Queen Cersei would die mysteriously, rumored that Maegor had her tongue cut out, which we just don't know, but it adds to the allure that Maegor is a violent person, that when there's too much fear, eventually people will flip on you, and that is what happens. He then burns poor fellows alive and massacres rescuers. He returns with 2,000 skulls as proof of victory over the Faith Militant. But the next issue would come with, when you're a king and you're trying to be a ruler, how do you go about with the economy? The realm was bankrupt, the taxes and levies increase, and hatred grows. So everything that Maegor had started with his reign, which was for the most part popularity that he had and approval, now was very much turning against him. He was a kinslayer. He was doing a ton of violence all of the time and flaunting it even in relative peace times. He was not ruling the realm the best in terms of the economy. It was all over the place a bad time for Maegor. Maegor still trying to have an heir after the death of Viserys, who wasn't actually his own child, but it was also his heir that he had in. He marries 3 widows, which would be known as the Black Brides, and Eleanor Costane, Jane Westerling, not the Jane of the normal story, and then Princess Rhaena Targaryen, one of the best characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, specifically in Fire and Blood. Rhaena's daughter Era was named heir, and Jaehaerys was disinherited. Lady Jane dies in childbirth, delivering deformed stillborns, and Lady Elena bears eyeless winged infants. Tyanna confesses to poisoning Alice and Jane's babies, and Maegor executes her personally. The realm declares him cursed by the gods. So once you have more situations where Maegor is shown to have terrible reproductive issues, having these monsters that he has birthed on these women, you start to see it where it's just like, okay, you're killing your wives left, right, and center. You can't have any children. There's instability in your realm. The economy is terrible. Your popularity has gone down the tubes. You finally get to the year 48 AC, where Maegor has his downfall. Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen finally thought it would be right to claim the Iron Throne at Storm's End. He was backed by Rhaegar Baratheon and many great lords. Dragons like Vermithor, Silverwing, and Dreamfire join his cause, as Queen Rhaena had fled Maegor with Aera and Blackfire. So I'll point this out. You do have definitely a lot of legitimacy with Jaehaerys getting Blackfire once again to him, the Sword of Aegon the Conqueror, but even with this, all of these dragons are extremely young, extremely small. I've pushed forward the idea that even with these 3 dragons, none of them were experienced dragon riders, especially in combat. Maegor had now had combat with another dragon. Balerion was by far the most experienced dragon of any of them, and the largest. Even with their dragons combined, it still would have been a bloody affair, and who knows if Alyssa would have allowed her 3 children to go into this combat, knowing she could possibly lose one, if not all of them. And so that leaves a major issue. How will Maegor's downfall go? Will it be in battle and war, like his whole real regency has been? Or will it be something even worse? And that's something I think George, I give him a lot of credit for. We don't get a heroic death for Maegor, like him going out and battle and fighting and dying. We get something much more pitiful. As the major lords in Kingsguard abandon Maegor, the royal fleet defects. The realm turns against him as few banners answer his call, only around 4,000 men. But that didn't necessarily mean his defeat. But as people were trying to tell him that maybe he should surrender, go into exile, Lord Hayford was even killed for this. But Maegor, at this point, assembling kind of his war council and thinking about what he could do, it seemed that the situation was growing dire. He would be 1 on 3 on these dragons, and he had almost no support. He was found dead on the Iron Throne with wrist slashed and neck impaled on a spike. The cause was unknown. Some thought it to be suicide, some thought it to be murder, but some also thought maybe it was the throne itself. And that's where it gets really interesting, is like, how did Maegor die? Now, I'm not really going to talk about it in this video because I don't think it's all that important to Maegor's reign. But if you do want to see that, I have made a video on this before talking about what I think likely happened. I think it was like a combination of things. I think it was likely a combination between his queen and then also some of the Kingsguard. But either way, the point of it is everybody had turned against Maegor, and Maegor had lost really all of his support. Now, I'll put this out there, and the reason I don't think Maegor killed himself and why I think he died almost pitifully betrayed by his queen and also the Kingsguard, it's just the fact that Maegor had been built up his entire life by Visenya to be fully believing in himself and believing in his abilities, especially at war. And I'm not even certain that Jaehaerys and his sisters could have beaten Maegor. Again, remember, his dragons are extremely small. Maegor is one of the best dragon riders we have in Targaryen history. I'm not certain whatsoever that Maegor would have lost the battle between Aenys' children. So I think it was definitely a planned assassination. People have thrown out there that maybe Rhaena was also in this, but I don't think so. But what would be remembered of Maegor the Cruel? He would be remembered as a tyrant and a kinslayer. His realm had cemented the Targaryen dominance and the dynasty overall, but it left the realm quite scarred. But I'll put this out there. I think the reason Jaehaerys' reign goes so well is that Maegor handed him a fairly easy situation. Like, yes, Jaehaerys needed to heal the differences between Maegor's supporters and, his own supporters and handling who had supported his older brother Aegon the Uncrowned, and then he had to deal with Faith and the remnants of that. But for the most part, when you think about the 2 kings that came before him, and both Maegor, Aenys, and hell, even Aegon uniting the kingdoms, Jaehaerys by far had the easiest situation. But I won't discount him. We're going to talk about Jaehaerys next. He'll be the next reign video we do. But I think this is what I take away from Maegor. If you're somebody that ranks the Targaryen kings based upon how much they did for the Targaryen dynasty, Maegor should be ranked slightly higher. He should be ranked probably around the middle of the Targaryen kings, not like in the top 5 or anything, but definitely in the middle. He shouldn't be at the very end, because without Maegor, the Targaryen dynasty collapses in on itself, and probably they fail as a dynasty within their first 30 to 40 years. But with that being said, Maegor did a lot of cruel actions. He did things that could have stopped the war. I mean, the war could have been ended quite early on if he just stopped doing the things he was doing, the cruelties, torturing and killing people. But in terms of the Targaryen dynasty, he did a fairly good thing in terms of taking out the Faith, eliminating that problem, which was the biggest threat to the Targaryen dynasty, doing things like making the Red Keep, kind of starting to build up King's Landing as a whole. He did some good things. But if you're looking at Maegor's dynasty from the average common person, he was a terrible king. He stood for cruelty, the killing of innocent people. The economy was terrible. There's not much to look at from Maegor's reign if you're a common person and go, yeah, this was great. He did this great thing. There's no real one you can point to. So I think if you're ranking it from that point of view, Maegor is definitely in your bottom 4 to 5 kings. I personally, regardless of how you look at him as a king, I would rank him above Aegon IV, Aerys II, Aenys, and probably Viserys, if you're looking at it from the common person. Now, I personally, in the way I look at him, especially from the Targaryen dynasty side of things, have him ranked higher than a lot of your mid-tier kind of kings that didn't do a whole lot. Like your Daeron I, your Baelors, those kind of kings. I tend to have Maegor ranked higher than them. But let me know what you guys think about Maegor the Cruel's reign and what you think about him as a king. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.